mean to shout, but anyway. Okay, welcome to the Urban Fantasy Tracks program on the Dresden Files. The first thing I want to know, which is what I always ask every time, is how many of you have come to some of the other Urban Fantasy Track programming this con? Okay, thank you. And we hope that some of you will do so now, after today. Now, what we're going to do is, after our two guests come out, I'm going to have a couple of questions for them, which will give you guys time to line up. If you would like to ask a question regarding the show, then you have Sheila over here. You hold your hand up, Sheila, so they can see you. And over here on this side, we have Erica, and you line up with them, please, to ask your questions. And after we do that, we'll get to your questions, since that's what we're going to be spending most of our time on. Okay? So today, we have the gentleman who created the character of Harry Dresden, Jim Butcher. And the gentleman who portrayed Harry Dresden, Paul Blackthorne.
Hello.
Thank you for being here, guys. I guess my first question for you is, what was your favorite episode from the season? Did you have a favorite episode from the season?
Jim?
I'm going to go with the one that I actually got to be in. Not just because I got to be there, but because it was such an experience of showing up and seeing Harry and Murphy and Butters, only everybody else could see them too. So that was an experience for me. So I'm actually in, I think, episode 8. I'm standing around in the background as one of Butters' minions. So yeah, that was my Stan Lee appearance.
My favorite episode. Gosh, it was a lot of fun. I have to say, there was one that I recall that particularly sticks in my mind, was it was with Joanne Kelly, who you may be familiar with. When she was being, was she being a vampire?
She was.
She was being a vampire, yes, and she was putting Dresden through all sorts of mayhem. He was like, I'm very attracted to this lady, and this lady's probably going to kill me. What do I do here? And there was a lot of neurosis going on in Dresden's mind, and I just remember the last scene was just the two of us on the sofa, I believe. And whatever was said, and then there was just this moment where I just sort of let out this sigh at the end of it. And I remember Robert Hewitt-Wolf, who was one of the producers on the show, he said, that's one of my favourite moments in the whole series, this sigh where you just go, oh my God. It was the biggest oh my God sigh without saying it. I just remember that particular episode was a lot of fun. And then, what was this is a long time ago now, you're going to have to forgive me, okay? I'm really having to cast my mind back. The werewolf moment, the werewolf.
Oh, yeah.
That was a really good one, yeah.
Yeah, and the lady that
was
portrayed her was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, there was good chemistry on the screen for that.
Yeah, she was that was great, yeah. Anything with blimmin' Terrence Mann as well was always a moment to remember. Terrence Mann.
Terry was, if you've never gotten to meet Terry, he is genuinely a great guy. He really is.
He's a good one. It was always a bit tricky, actually, I have to say, because, of course, I was doing an American accent, and he was doing a British accent. I would have the dialect coach be giving him notes, and I couldn't listen to those notes. And she would give me notes, and I couldn't, it was a lot of close your ears on the other person's notes. But it was a lot of fun.
Well, you both had us fooled, so you did a nice job. What power or ability of the characters did you particularly enjoy?
What ability?
Right, what his magical ability or power that he had, was there one that you particularly enjoyed?
He was quite good, really, wasn't he? He was quite a lot of interesting powers. But of course, how everything backfired, the way that you created the character, Jim, it's like he can do all this stuff, but of course everything breaks around him, and just the general idea of You know, he's such a reluctant, I think that's what I enjoyed about portraying the character, was that he was such a reluctant hero in my mind. And it's like, oh, do I really have to save the world? I suppose I can, and I guess I should. And, you know, and that whole element was always a lot of fun to play. So that doesn't really answer your question, but it's what came to my mind just then.
So in other words, any of the powers reluctantly used, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that bracelet was handy.
Oh, yeah, that was.
I remember that. That saved the day once or twice.
And Jim, was there something that was an aspect that was in the show that didn't actually show up in the books that you particularly enjoyed?
This could get controversial.
Well, no, not at all. One of the things about it was, you know, there's got to be some translation when you take it from a book to a television series, especially a television series, because there's much more limits in terms of the budget. You know, for me, I can destroy Chicago or not destroy Chicago in a book, and it costs me exactly the same. But a TV show has got, you got to consider those things. So Bob the Skull was taken from, the Skull character, who, he's basically glowy lights and a voice in the books. But in order to do that on TV, they would have either needed to spend an enormous amount of the budget doing special effects of just animating the skull, which was not really an option, or they could have done like a puppet, like the cat on Sabrina.
Not a good idea.
Yeah, also not a good idea.
Nothing against Sabrina.
So instead they decided to embody Bob the Skull, and they had Terrence Mann play him. I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but by the time I'd seen the first couple of episodes, and by the time I'd met Terrence Mann, I was kind of sold on it, because Terry was a really great guy, and because he did such a good job with the role. So I think that was, as far as changes go, I think that was the one that surprised me about how much I really enjoyed it.
Can I just ask, Jim, was in the pilot, when we shot the pilot initially, there was no Terrence, was there? It was just the skull.
No, there was no Terrence, it was just the skull.
Yeah.
And then they decided, no way, it's going to cost too much to cause that. So in the original pilot, the actual shots with Bob the Skull in it just have like this green cylinder. And a voice coming out of it, but just a green cylinder that says temporary shot, and it never became anything else. It's just a green cylinder there.
So what did we do? Did we pick up shots later on with
they edited it down, and they wrote his part out of it, which made it much more confusing. But the episode that was originally was a 2-hour pilot, and they edited it down to a 1-hour episode.
And then showed it 8, I believe.
Yeah, I think they mostly concentrated on making sure that he got to kiss Murphy. And that was the...
He got to kiss Murphy?
Yeah, you got to kiss Murphy, yeah.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah, you.
Did Bob kiss her? And I have to say, I would concur with all that as well. It's a lot easier working with a human being than it is a green blob in front of you that the script supervisor lady would be saying the lines off and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I'm glad they cast a human being in the end.
Yeah.
It's always a bonus.
Okay, we will start over here on the right, well, my right, with Sheila.
Hi there, this question's for Jim. In Deadbeat, it's mentioned that the Lieb der Elking books were mostly destroyed by Cal when he was going through, right? So that left maybe 1 or 2 copies left in the world, basically. So in
I'm still waiting for the question.
it's set up. So in Cold Days, who called the Wild Hunt?
In Cold Days, who called the Wild Hunt? It hasn't really been specified yet. It's probably safe to say that Mab set it up, though. She was setting up most of that stuff, so.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That answered the question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all...
Jim and I, by the way, have not seen each other in, 8 years?
Something like that.
Yeah, we just sort of reacquainted backstage.
Yeah.
So, just...
First of all, Jim, glad that you got your long hair back. Appreciate that.
Thank you. I told everybody it would grow back, and no one took me seriously.
This is how you should look. Okay, so is there any chance of a spin-off of Dresden from one of the other characters, like, I don't know, Murphy or Butters, I don't know, someone?
You mean like when I'm done with the Dresden Files series?
Yeah.
I've actually got a couple of different spin-offs in mind. We'll see what happens. It's with a character you've seen yet, and I'm not going to tell you who. But we've already met the character, so,
Can I be in it?
Really? okay with me.
Yes, Jim. As much as I'd like to see the Dresden Files brought to life before, where's the countdown at until we can get to see it again?
Well, I used to keep track of the countdown of how long it would be before I had the rights back after Sci-Fi was done with them. They gave them up early, so they were out and marketed again. They've been picked up by a major production company. We'll see if anything happens. Yeah, ooh. It's Hollywood, man. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. It's all a lot of talk until the check clears. But we'll see if they actually get anything done with it or not. It's a company that has done, I mean, you would know, I could start listing movies and everybody here will have seen them. But I don't want to say anything more than that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, you had. So, in your magic system, it's super engaging and intuitive and really interesting. I want to know, how much of that did you plan before you started writing the series, and how do you keep it from ruining your world? Because you are able to make things that are completely ridiculous happen, but explain them in such a way that everybody's like, oh yeah, it totally makes sense that you have a Tyrannosaurus Rex running down Main Street. How do you do that and make it not so fantastical?
When I was researching it, I went and hit up the local metaphysics section at the Border store, and I just picked up about half a dozen books about magic. I figured I would go and read books by people who actually incorporated it into their belief system. And so after that, I just went through it like a salad bar, and I took all the things that I thought would be good, or interesting, or would cause Harry Dresden problems. Because really, the main thing that when you're writing a story, the main thing you've got to do is you've got to cause problems for your protagonist, and you've got to make sure he has a horrible day, and that everything bad that's going to happen is going to happen to him at the worst possible time, and then you shoot him. And I'm sorry, I got asked my favorite moment that I'd ever written, and it's like, oh, it had to have been when I shot Dresden, and yeah, I did that.
I never knew about that.
I totally killed you in like book 12.
Really?
Book 13, you had to solve your own murder.
See, that's good stuff, right? That's good stuff. That should be on TV.
But as far as keeping the magic together, that's not hard. I mean, that's just I established the rules. Now let's go play with them.
So not so much just for the magic, but when you do a lot of different things, it seems like in the real world.
So when you do things, and it seems ridiculous, but not always with the magic system itself. Do you have a situation in mind and then write up to it and try to explain it, or do you explain it and then have that, like when he got shot or the Tyrannosaurus, things like that, where it's just so cinematic that you have to describe it?
Some stuff I've got to plan out, and the having a zombie T-Rex, setting that up, that took. I was waiting to write that scene for like 5 years. Everything from the beginning of the book was basically written to set up that scene later at the end of the book. It's like, oh, if you need an old corpse, and the old corpses can hold more magic, so you can make tougher zombies out of older corpes. Terry's going to go get a 65 million year old corpse from the museum, and we'll see how tough your guys are next to that. And so it's fun to do that kind of thing. You got to ride around in a dinosaur.
Does anybody mind if I ask a question? When did you write your first book, Jim?
My first book I wrote when I was 19. I wrote it in 1991. It was awful. So then I wrote the second one, and it was also terrible, as were books 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
I presume none of those were Dresden. Were those different characters?
These are completely different novels. Right. And I would not have made Osama bin Laden read those novels. But then one year I decided, for my writing teacher who'd been trying to teach me how to write good books for a long time, and I was in a survey course in her class, and I decided I was going to prove to her how wrong she was about everything she was trying to teach me. And the way I would do this was I would do exactly what she told me to do. I was going to be her good little writing monkey, and I would fill out all her forms and do all the little outlines and do little character design stuff, and I would show her what terrible cookie-cutter pablum crap resulted from that kind of process. And so I wrote the first book of the Dresden Files. Which, which showed her.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for giving a voice in my head every time I read the books, because I saw the show first and I got the books afterwards, and
Thank you very much.
you know, you never wear another duster in the series, really, like Harry does in the books. I see you running around a lot of times, especially in the weird places like when you go down to Mexico, but that's another story.
Okay, we'll talk about that afterwards. Okay.
But I actually have two for Jim, because I have a friend of mine who can't speak today. She had a great character if she did, so I do apologize. The first is, I saw in your AMA when Cold Days was coming out that you said you had a couple more books lined up for Harry. Do you have maybe a shot in the dark how many you think you have left? And the second one, I do apologize for asking too. She wants to know, how do you see your Harry in the book differing from the Harry that's read by James Masters in the audiobooks?
Okay, for the first one, I'm going to do about 20 of the case books like we've had so far. So we're on book 15, we've got another 5 or so of those. It could be more if my kid decides to go to grad school. Let's be honest, people, there's practical things driving my career. I don't have a muse, I have a mortgage. But then we're going to have a big old 3-book kind of apocalyptic trilogy to finish off the series, kind of as a capstone thing. And I honestly don't know if he's going to survive it. Sorry. As far as the voice in my head differing, I don't know. He talks faster. But that's the only complaint I have about Marsters is that he's doing the reading on the audiobooks and it's slow. It's got to be because he's doing an audiobook and otherwise you can't understand him. But I'm always going, hurry up! I read faster than this. Hurry up!
I'd be happy to do that if he ever gets bored of the idea.
Oh, yeah.
That would be perfect. Okay, here, Erica.
Hey, I have a question for Jim.
Oh, you.
So, since Harry lost his staff and his blasting rod, do you think in the next book maybe we'll see him with a hockey stick?
What a question. Carrie's kind of a creature of habit. He's unlikely to go around changing that kind of thing. Although that was another one of those things that I frowned about because it's like, why would they give him a hockey stick instead of a wizard staff? Who carries around a hockey stick? And I got on the plane to go up to Toronto to visit the set while they were filming, and there were 14 guys on the planes with hockey sticks. They just let these guys on the plane with clubs. And I'm like, what? And they're like, it's Canada, man. I'm like, oh. Okay. All right, I understand.
Hi.
Silence.
Over here.
Yeah, the mic was off, okay.
This question is for Mr. Blackthorn.
It's very nice when people call you by your last name, isn't it?
You're very polite here in Atlanta. Was there anything in particular that drew you to this character when you decided to take this role?
Was the fact that he carried a hockey stick, actually. But, there you go. Apart from that, it was kind of what I was alluding to earlier on. Due to this fantastically interesting, rich, complex character that Jim created, there was a lot that I sort of responded to, and that the reluctant hero. Being a hero is kind of one thing, and you run around and everything is fantastic, and you save this and you save that, and it's all what you plan to do and expect to do because you're a hero. But the reluctant hero, he just kind of wants to hang out and read a book and try and polish something up or whatever. That to me was what was interesting about this character, and made him a lot more appealing to play. So that's always what stuck in my mind, just the reluctant hero. And I always think it was slightly more heroic, the fact that he did actually get off his bum and do stuff because he was so reluctant in the first place. So, he's actually more of a hero as a result of being reluctant. But anyway, so that was it. For sure.
being a hero is like really hard on your house and your car, and you know, it's just not practical.
You have to look the part and everything.
If you would just rather kind of go to the bar and get a beer, being a hero is really inconvenient.
Hi, this question is for Jim, but it's a little bit of setup. Because I had read the books, my wife and I had read the books. We hadn't seen the show. We didn't know really much about the show at the time. Then later on, we saw the gates with Blackthorn, and we were like, oh, he would be a perfect Harry Dresden. So we actually seen the series, and we're like, oh my god. And I'm just wondering if you had any kind of hand in the casting of the show, or if you had any kind of approval of who would play Harry.
Should I close my ears? Not Blackthorn, not Blackthorn.
None whatsoever. I had a wee bit of influence because I happened to get along well with Robert Wolfe. And so he had one point had dropped me an email and said, hey, is there anybody that you think we should look at? And I had a couple suggestions. He said, well, we can't look at them. So, I mean, that was that. Although I do know that it came down, the final two that they were considering for the role, it came down to Paul, and it came down to Jane from Firefly. And they decided that... They decided that Paul could pull off the kind of darker side of Dresden a little bit better. That he could do that he could kind of do those dark, intense moments a little bit harder. If we'd have gone with Adam Baldwin, it would have been a much more bulldogish Dresden who probably got beat up more.
I got beat up enough as it was. He wouldn't survive the day then.
The drivers at the show were joking with me. It's like, yeah, we drive Paul up every day. We have to ask him, are you getting beat up or are you getting to make out with a beautiful woman today?
It was kind of one or the other, I have to say. It was interesting. Yeah. Or Terrence Mann giving me grief. But, there you go.
Hi. This question is for Paul, but first I wanted to thank both of you. Paul, if you hadn't done a fabulous job bringing Harry to life for that year, I would never have gotten into the books. And they are by far my favorite books, so thank you so much, Jim, for writing them. And I listen to them, so when I hear James Marsters in my head, I see you.
That's interesting.
So I was wondering if you had ever read any of the books, even a couple before you took on your role as Harry.
It all happened in a bit of a whirlwind, as these things tend to do. The pilot was cast. I was cast in the pilot. And yeah, it's an ongoing process. It took forever, and I completely messed up the first sort of. You have a sort of. I can't remember. Did I have an audition? I had a test in front of the network. What normally happens is you have an audition with the producers, then you have a test with the studio, and you get signed off along the way. Then you get to the network, and the network do the big yes or no sort of thing. And I got to the network the first time round, and I completely messed it up. I just walked in there and it just fell flat on its face. And Robert and the other producers at the time came in, what's going on? What are you doing? I said, I don't know, guys. I just had a bad day. I'm sorry. I just had a bad day. And then I kind of pleaded to be let back in the room a couple of days later. And I did. And I got back in, and thankfully I kind of knocked that one out of the park. So I was like, thank you, whatever, thank you. I was very grateful. And then the next thing you know, you're filming. We went off to Toronto very soon after that, and then once you've been offered the part, you're like, okay, well, I've got to get my head around this part. I picked up one of Jim's books and went, how many pages are in those books? I'm like going, yeah, and I'm a really slow reader, and I was like, oh my god, I should be reading all these books, but there was literally no way I was going to be able to, and do what I needed to do, which was part of my acting sort of process, is just find the psychology of the character himself and just find that for my side of things. So I sat down with the producers, and I would have loved to have sat down with Jim, but that would have never happened at that stage. And just rummaged around as best I could, asking as much as I could about the mythology that already existed and the nature of the character, and then just try to pick up from there and add to it whatever I could. And then, 10 minutes later, you're standing in front of a camera going, okay, I guess I'll do it like this then. Yeah. And that was it. So the answer to your question was no. But I do like to babble on for hours.
I'm going to ask this question two ways so you can both answer it. Jim, you said you liked how Terrence Mann portrayed Bob in the show, so I was wondering if you liked that they changed the lecherous pig to more of an Alfred in the show. And Paul, how would you have felt acting to a Bob that was a lecherous pig as opposed to Alfred?
A lecherous pig. Oh, hang on, I'm confused. I thought you were talking over there. You have to understand, there's these big bright lights and it's very shadowy.
Yeah, exactly. We are blinded by the
She said,
light.
isn't that woman over there? Okay, so that's probably why I couldn't pick up half the question. But I had something about a lecherous pig.
Yes, in the book, Bob is a lecherous pig. He's all about, he's very into pornography.
Oh, he's not an actual pig, he's just a sort of a natural... Okay, well you never really know in this world, right? I'm thinking, Jim, did you write something about a pig?
That's a fair question to clarify.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he was really into pornography and was always trying to get Harry to sleep with every woman that he saw.
There was, oh gosh, I wish I could remember all this better now, but I remember there was one, well, it was a few times in various episodes where it popped up when he was
That was just creepy.
He was sort of like, well, you're going to though, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Is she coming round again?
It was like there was this flash of Frankenfurter in there for a moment.
Yeah. So, so it wasn't actually a lecherous pig. I remembered some of that chemistry. It was kind of fun. You could probably talk about that more than I can, Jim. I'm going to be quiet now.
I thought it was great because they had changed Bob's role. I mean, it was not as I had written it. I understood why they made the changes though, and it was very good in terms of the show for what they were doing, because they needed somebody who could be not just Dresden's sidekick, or not just kind of his personal computer, as it were, which is really kind of the role Bob fills in the book a lot of times, but somebody that he could be emotionally involved with and emotionally invested in, because there's no room for that kind for slack in the show the way there is in the books. I've got a little bit of a luxury in writing the books. When you get on TV, though, you've got to have that emotional investment in everything that's going on, or else the audience just won't care. So as far as that went, it worked for the show. It was needed for the show. It was necessary for the show. And I love the way that Terrence pulled it off. And I love the vibe that got established between them, because there was sort of this professional, friendly rivalry that was going between them, but there was also much more of a mentor role in many ways as it was happening. As Terrence had been playing this character who was more worldly, who had been around longer, who had seen a lot of things. And yet, who was in many ways was trapped and could only experience the world through Dresden's character. So it was an interesting dynamic, and I think it worked really well for what they were doing on screen.
Did Dresden have the ability to unleash him from his sort of chains, so to speak?
He could, but there were horrible consequences when that sort of thing happened.
Right, because I seem to remember something like that. There's been something in the dynamic that he could release him, but he knew he couldn't because of this, that, or the other. But there was he was a mentor, but at the same time there was all this history to it. So it was really interesting to play. It was great stuff.
Yeah, changing Terrence to a person as opposed to this kind of completely amoral, creature made a huge difference in how that worked out. But I liked what they were doing with it on screen, because you've got to do everything. TV is like short stories. I mean, you've got to get so much done in so little time as far as telling a story goes. It's like trying to have a knife fight in a phone booth, because so much has to be packed into not very much time.
Well,
That's
Paul,
an interesting analogy, isn't it? I'm a bit worried about next time I go and shoot on set, to be honest.
And Paul, how many times did you have to did you keep count of how many times you had to say, Bob, get back in your skull?
I didn't keep count, but it does ring. It rings a bell now that you say it. Yeah, Bob. Yeah.
Okay.
Paul, you're in one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Lagan. Could you talk a little bit about being such an epic Indian movie, how that happened, and how long it took?
Well, here we are at the Dresden Files panel, and of course I'll talk about an Indian Bollywood film that nobody's probably got a clue about. Does anybody know about that film? A film called Lagan? It's flattering. But that's the reason I ended up in Los Angeles in the first place, because I ended up doing that film. Actually, there's an interesting story with that. It was one of those sort of moments in life that was curious, because I was in London, and my sort of career was sort of heading in the right direction. I was getting off the ground. I was doing some British television and film and such like, theatre. And then suddenly my agent called me and said, there's this Indian film they want to see you for. And I started thinking, but my career's getting off the ground, and does this really suit where I should be, the direction I should be heading in now, and, trying to be sort of all intellectual about it, and plotting this, acting career that I was going to have on the Great British Stage or something. And then I suddenly thought to myself, hang on a minute, I've never been to India. And this script, I can hardly make head or tail of it. There's 78 speaking characters in it, and half of it's in Hindi and all the rest of it. But I thought, even if this is the worst film in history, I will have a chance to go to India for 4 months and experience this amazing country that I've never been to before. And, let's just go with the flow. And then a year later, it was nominated for the Oscars for Best Foreign Language, in the Best Foreign Language category in 2002. So I somewhat vindicated my decision to not care too much about what happened about it. But I looked at it as one of those moments where, well, try not to work things out too much, just go with the flow, follow, listen to the belly, follow the heart, and just, if it feels good, just go for it. And so that's how I ended up in Los Angeles, because Amir Khan, who's the big super-duper hero of Indian cinema, he said to me, do you want to come along? We've got to get Academy members to watch this film now, so that we can get the nomination. And so we were sort of staring at each other in hotels in Hollywood, wondering what to do next. But through his considerable influence, he was able to sort of get Academy members in the screenings. It was nominated. And of course, that was all very exciting. But of course, at that time, it was pilot season that takes place in Los Angeles, where all the networks make all these pilots, such as the Dresden Files and such like. So I happened to be in LA whilst this was happening, and I called my agent in London. Then serendipitously, in a peculiar way, I met an agent, and then I was cast in a pilot for Fox Television that never got picked up. But a few months later, I was cast in a show that did run for a series, and that was it. That's how it all sort of began. That was how, and then 3 or 4 years later, it's the Dresden Files, and a few years later it's Arrow, and you're like, oh, this thing keeps going on. It was all because I thought I would just have a laugh with this Indian film and see what Indians like. So, life's a funny thing sometimes, right? But, yeah.
Well, how y'all doing? This question is for both of you. One of my favorite characters in the books is Kincaid. And I'm just curious, like, if you could have cast him in the show, what actor would you have cast as him?
Oh, okay, if I was going to cast Kincaid in the show? Oh, gosh, I don't know. Let's cast, let's go with Thor. I'm blanking on the actor's name now. Chris? Okay, yeah, you all know who he is. Come on, this is Dragon Con. I can say Thor, and everybody knows who I'm talking about.
This question is for Paul. Since you've been in the Dresden Files...
Am I looking in the right direction?
Yes.
Okay, so not over there. Okay, good. I'm staying here.
Yes, Dresden Files and Arrow, of course. And before that was The River. Were you a science fiction fan before all this?
I've never really been a science fiction fan or a comic book fan, but something seems to be going on here, right? No is the answer to that question. And the same thing's been said about Arrow with the... Did you read all the comic books and all the rest of it? And again, you're tuning the television show, so in that case I was very much aware that, they're creating a different world in the television show, so I'll just concentrate on what the producers are giving us each week. So I didn't look too much into that, but not a huge fan. Now, just as I got used to looking over there, you go and wander over there. You're not even listening to the answer. I'm kidding. So yeah, did that answer your question? Okay.
This is for Paul. I know you mentioned that you hadn't read the books before actually portraying the character itself, but you discussed it with the network and whatnot, trying to find out how to make Harry your own character as well. I was just kind of curious what tweaks that you feel that you brought to the table as opposed to what the network provided.
What I brought to the table?
What tweaks? What changes that
tweets?
What changes?
Oh, tweaks. Sorry, it's all about tweeting these days, isn't it? Sorry. I didn't tweet anything. I just kind of got on with it in my own living room. Just tweeting my character process. Yes.
But what you brought to the table to alter Harry to make him like your own character, to make it your own part of that.
Okay, you have to be careful because when actors start talking about their process, it's like, it starts becoming very, well, whatever. I do have quite a process in creating a character. It doesn't kind of just happen when you turn up on set. And without banging on about it for hours, or pretending that it's any great high art or anything, all I concentrate on is, well, we look around at human beings, and from here, every one of us got our own story, that created our own life, our own background, that created our psychology, that created how we're behaving in this very moment, right? And in the scenes of a story, television, or whatever, that is the moment you're portraying. So every moment in your life is leading up to how you're going to react in this moment. So for me, what I was taught, the method of acting that I was taught was the psychology of acting. So I create a backstory, literally from moment of birth. Glass next door. I think that's the... That's when I started telling them about my acting process. So basically, that's what happens. That's
a bunch of hooligans in here.
Right? I think that's the Arrow panel, right? Is that? I should probably be running next door in a second. So that's basically what happens.
I will say that what I thought that Paul did that was not something that I was nearly as good at conveying in the books, is I thought that he conveyed kind of the scars that the character had carried with him very, very well. You know, you could see that Dresden had faced pain and trauma before and had been in bad, dark places. And when they said that they thought he would carry that off really well when they cast him, they were absolutely right. He did a fantastic job with that.
That is a huge compliment coming from the man that created the character. So thank you very much, Mr. Butcher. Very kind. But yeah, it's all about pain. Life is a lot of pain, right? You've got to remember that. That's what you're trying to imbue into the characters.
Yeah, I might mention that once or twice in the books, I think. So.
Yeah. You caused me hell with that character. You know, I sweat and tears with that guy.
Okay, now we're on this side.
All right, so kind of a so you mentioned how much easier it is to work with a human as opposed to a cylinder.
Well, not all humans.
Right.
There are exceptions.
Yeah. But then you said how handy the shield was. Was it weird to know that there was going to be these CGI effects coming in, and obviously it affects the process. But then also, Jim, did those effects look like what you thought they would look like when you were writing them? So when he goes, for Zaze, is that what you kind of picture, and how do you do that as an actor? Just kind of both parts.
Okay, on the bin first shot. With CGI, it's just a horrible thing to act with. Doesn't matter what it is. It is what it is. But however, obviously, it's telling the story is all about imagination anyway. So whether you're doing it with CGI or a human being, right here, there's still a bunch of lights and sweaty, sound guy and crew and grips and a director that's just waiting to yell at you or whatever. It's not like it's that real anyway when it's supposed to be real. You know what I mean? So, but having said that, there is a lot easier acting with somebody and connecting with somebody. It's all about acting's all about listening, basically. As long as you've done all your homework on your character and your scenes and all the rest of it, and then you kind of get to set, and you kind of try and forget about that stuff and just listen to the other actor. And then that's when stuff comes out that you don't expect to come out, right? Because not the stuff you rehearsed in your bedroom last night, it was brilliant. Oh, I'm going to do it just like that when we shoot it. And you do that and they go, okay, can we do that again? Because that was awful, because you're trying to sort of create something which has already happened, right? So that's kind of boring. But if you listen to the other actors, then just stuff happens, right? So CGI challenges that somewhat, because there's not much listening you can do in a lot of those cases. But at the same time, it's still all imagined circumstances, so you just you can't sit there and moan about it, you just got to get on with it, really. So you get on with it, like you do with all these things. Jim?
As far as the way the effects got pulled off as opposed to what they're like in my head, my head has a higher budget, I think, than the show did.
Yeah.
Because again, I mean, a lot of them did come off really cool, and there were a lot of the effects that I looked at and went, okay, damn, that looked nice. I'm down with that. That was great, especially the shield bracelet stuff. That wound up looking very cool when it was finally done. But I mean, my head is kind of in a Marvel comic books level explosions rate, laser beam stuff flying around sort of place, because I'm basically a 12-year-old child. Again, there's only so much money for them to make things happen with, and it's really, you don't really understand exactly how huge and complex putting a show together is until you're actually there and you see this army of people that are trying to make things happen. And when Paul says, "Can we do that again?" and just as likely he's going to hear from the producer or the director, "No, we're an hour late for lunch. Everybody's hungry."
Yeah, and that is the thing. You mentioned the money, but the time is absolutely huge.
And the time. I mean, the entire they'll be there 16 hours a day, more than that often, to do 3 minutes of an episode, and they've got to do that day after day and week after week to get a season of show done. So I mean, it's a marathon when you're making a show.
I'll tell you one thing. I remember the pilot. What happens with the pilot is because they're trying to find the tone of the show. There's a lot more. They spend a lot more time shooting pilots, maybe 3 weeks or something. Right? I think that was it with Dresden. But then it's like, okay, we're making it into a TV show. You got 8 days. It might have actually been less with Dresden. It might have been 7, I think. And then they tried to shave off a half day at one point, and everyone was just like, "You are kidding." But anyway, that's another story. What was my point? I forget what I was going to say. That's right. So I get there. So the pilot, we have plenty of time. But certainly from an acting point of view, I had plenty of time to do it. 3 weeks. We're laughing. But when we came to the first episodes, to shoot in 7 or 8 days, whatever it was, I'm thinking, okay, so I'm in every scene. You get the scripts about like 2 days before maybe the episode's going to shoot. I like to prepare as an actor. I like to spend a few hours preparing and maybe having conversations with the producers. I like to learn the lines sometimes, because that kind of helps. And then maybe have various other discussions about the show and whatever that might be. Was that Bob? What was that? You coming up? And I remember thinking, after about 4 days, I was like, I don't think this is actually possible. I don't think I'm being a prima donna, or I don't think I'm creating a scene. I just don't think this is feasibly possible. But then I thought to myself, well, I can't really just step out and say, "Sorry, everybody, this isn't possible." You clearly have to find a way. And I just figured out, and thankfully, I had a dialect coach. That was the first time I had a dialect coach. Ray Ellen Bodie was her name, and she was like an angel that came down. And she was supposed to be there for my dialect. Now, fortunately, I'm okay generally with the dialect, and especially having spent months with her doing it. But what she turned into was my support system. And it was very clear that I just had to remain very present constantly and not freak out about what the workload was, but just enjoy it in the time that you had, and just have a bit of faith that it would kind of work out by the time the next scene came around. And it was very, very challenging. Very, very challenging. But it absolutely was one of the most fulfilling, fantastic experiences I've ever had on television. So I was kind of thankful for it as well. Lost the question in my mind completely, done it again, babbled on, but told you something or other, right? It was a real privilege being on that show, that's all I will say. It was a huge honour.
This question is for both Mr. Butcher and Mr. Blackmore. You seem to have put your traits into Harry, for example, the love of Burger King. Are there any traits that Harry has that you don't, but wish you did?
At times I kind of wish that I was a beer kind of guy. I don't actually do alcohol at all. And people will come up to me and say, "We brought you this craft beer that we thought you would just love based on reading the Dresden Files." I'm like, "Oh, that is so sweet of you." I don't actually drink.
I do. I'll give you my number. We'll sort that out.
Now you know where to send all of the alcohol.
Yeah. I'm English.
Okay, over here.
Maybe that.
Okay.
Hi, my question is for both of you. I was wondering what your favorite aspect of Harry Dresden is that we don't actually get to see on the book, on the page, or on the screen, as far as either backstory or personality.
For me, I think it's that Dresden he's not really interested in being a terribly heroic person. He mostly would just rather be home reading a book or maybe going and hanging out with friends, and generally sort of living a quiet life. I mean, help somebody find their lost wedding ring. Yeah, I can totally do that. I'm happy with that, and thank you for your money, and here's your ring. But he just keeps winding up in these circumstances. But it's boring to read about that. So basically, anything that I write in a book is the worst weekend he's going to have that year. I stop and ask myself, what's the worst weekend he's going to have? Okay, that's what I need to write about, is that right there. But you don't really get to see Dresden, living the quiet life, which he does most of the time.
I'm just casting my mind back. I'm trying to think about that backstory stuff, what I would have created way back then. I remember and this was what was great actually, when the dad turned up in whatever episode that was.
Right.
Before that was ever sort of known that would be happening, I'd obviously spent a lot of time thinking about Dresden's childhood and such like, and and forgive me if this conflicts at all with whatever was created in your world, Jim, but for me it was like a lot of loneliness, you know what I mean, and a lot of like just not being able to understand himself, because obviously having some powers that you just don't understand as a child, and then how you fit in the world, and then just keeping a lid on that, and just the sort of pain of that, and knowing you're so different, but not knowing how to express it, was, here comes all that pain stuff, basically, all that weird sort of isolated pain stuff. But that was always kind of interesting to me, just thinking about this sort of slightly lonely, sort of slightly desolate childhood that he would have had, until he finally would have understood himself, at some stage later, and then even then going, oh no, really? Is this, once he's understood it, then going, oh, why me?
Harry Dresden is the Charlie Brown of the urban fantasy world.
That's my whole backstory, you just nailed it.
Okay, over this side.
Yeah, I have a bit of a question about there's a thing on YouTube where it's the Dresden Files like fan filming, and when the Skin Game came out, they had a Skin Game trailer where they hinted at a bunch of the stuff from the book, and it said they got like a pre-copy. I was wondering if you had any actual connection with them, or if it was just like a producer sent them a book or something.
The only connection I had with them was that I got in touch with them and asked them to do a trailer for my book. Other than that, nothing really. Dresden Files Fan Film Group, or DF3, they operate out of Denver, and they've done a bunch of little Harry Dresden scenes here and there over the past several years. And I got together with them and said, hey, do you want to do a trailer for this next book? Because, I'm egotistical enough to want a trailer for my book. And they were like, yes, we would love to do that. And so they got to, I'm like, okay, show me what you can do. And they got together and they worked their butts off and to produce a trailer that came out, which I was very pleased with. In as much as I think they got the mood of it just right, and they had sent me the script ahead of time. I took a look at it and said, oh, okay, yeah, this looks pretty good. Maybe you should do this, or maybe you can add this bit to it. But for the most part, they're huge fans and they're huge nerds about the books, and they love the stories, and it shows in what they do. So.
We have a question over here.
Hi, my question is for both of you. I have heard over the years a lot of flack about the series of books being made into the TV series itself. And my question is, how have you guys responded to that? And did you ever get a lot of flack from it? And what have you done to not let that get to you?
Jim?
The biggest flack that I've got was my book audience tripled in 1 year. And it was difficult to deal with that. There were a lot of book readers who were like, "Oh my God, I did so," and I could only turn to those and goes, "Guys, listen, it could have been a whole lot worse. I saw the first several treatments, and before Robert Wolfe got a hold of the series, it could have got mutated a whole lot worse than it did." And actually having Robert work on it and getting to talk to him and Hans Beimler, who was Robert's partner in writing it, they were great guys, and they had read the books and liked them. And so I was able to say, okay, here's my baby. You have to a degree, you have to accept that when you're a writer, when you're a novelist, and your stuff goes to be made into a film, into a TV show, your baby's going off to boarding school, and you have to be able to accept that.
That's a great analogy. That's perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
See ya.
Yeah, you're releasing a lot of control over it, and I tried to give all the positive feedback I could. I tried to approach things in terms of what can I do to help, as opposed to what can I do to try and edit this and make it more like what I originally had. So changes got made. Harry drove an old Jeep in this one instead of an old Volkswagen, because if you want to film somebody in a Volkswagen, you've got to have an expensive Volkswagen that comes apart into teeny pieces in order to be able to film any angle other than directly ahead. So they said, you know what? It'll be a lot cheaper to just get an old army Jeep, a Korean War army Jeep, which really fits the same strictures on the magical universe, because these things are really easy to fix and put back together again, and you can run them on just about anything. So Harry really can't kill it very easily. So it would be a perfect vehicle for him, and he also, additionally, he gets to be more cold.
Just more misery for him to go
driving around in the winter. So it's like, okay, you're right. Then that's a good vehicle for him to have, and that they did a good job with it.
And you see, this is where the bit about the actors bit. Well, that doesn't matter, because the actor will be freezing his. And it was a case of driving that thing around in the winter. And have you ever tried to drive one of those things?
I have not.
Gee whiz. The whole thing about TV, TV parking and TV everything is that it just happens, right? Getting into one of those things, trying to find the gear and start up, it's not working. You're supposed to be just floating off, It was a very challenging vehicle to work with. It only popped up a couple of times, didn't it? It was actually clamped that one time, wasn't it? In one of the episodes, thankfully. But yeah, that was pretty challenging. But anyway, sorry.
No, I was.
Were you done? Good. There's the flack question.
Yeah, there was some negative stuff, but you know what? I try to tell people, just enjoy it. This is a good take on it. Consider it an alternate universe, and have fun.
The thing I've always heard about the book-to-screen sort of situation is that, the book, as you're reading words, you obviously create in your mind a universe that can't possibly be wrong in your mind because you created it, right? But then you see somebody else's interpretation of it on screen, which just by the very fact that it's different, will therefore be kind of wrong from your perception. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that's why that's a constant sort of story with a book to screen sort of adaptation.
That's a good observation.
You know what I mean? So I think it's. I'm just going to stop there. He just said it was a good observation. I'm saying think back. It's something like that, right? With regard to my answering that question, the flat question, I'm not coming from the same place as Jim in that respect, but all I've ever heard through website or social media or events is why was Dresden cancelled after one season? It was ridiculous. That's all I've ever heard. I've never heard anybody say anything bad about it. And that's been, 7 years now? So, it's extraordinary. And some things are just inexplicable, aren't they? Because there's other shows on Sci-Fi that, very happy for them, went on for a long time, but I couldn't ever put my finger on the Dresden thing.
I have my theories, and there's like pictures and bits of string that go across the room. There's no evidence for it. It's a complete conspiracy theory, but I actually think that makes conspiracy theory stronger.
No evidence.
Yeah, no evidence whatsoever. It's just that theory.
Well, I think it also had to do with the show airing in a year where it was just a little before the curve that you see now, because the Blood Ties was out at the same time, and Moonlight, and none of them lasted very long, but now it would probably be a different story.
Well, that was before True Blood, is
right.
What it amounts to, the success of True Blood. So.
Indeed.
You laid the foundation, Jim.
Yes.
He did.
Or got crushed into it.
Yeah, or got crushed into part of it.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today, folks. But let's give these gentlemen a hand, please.
Guys, I'm going to do one thing. I've got to do one thing before you step out of here. It's kind of obligatory for these panels. I've been getting into the swing of this. It's called a selfie with as many fans as possible. And in this case, Jim Butcher as well. So Jim, come back.
Yeah.
One for this side.
fans.